dig up a past I swore would stay buried.
You will always be a monster.
Ares! I have nothing more to hide.
The ghost of Sparta had been born.
I believe I have stumbled upon some extremely key information concerning Faye's role in Kratos' arrival to Scandinavia. We know Kratos reached Midgard more than 100 to 150 or even more years ago because of something Freya says when we first enter the travel room.
This temple has been asleep, underwater for almost 150 winters.
If this is the truth, Kratos could not have been in Greece in the last century or so due to the vase revealed in Tyr's vaults portraying Kratos destroying the Olympians and in general all of Olympus. We also know from a Kotaku interview with Cory Barlog that the distance between Midgard and Olympus is actually just the distance between Greece and Scandinavia. In his own words.
Like, I've always looked at this universe as, you know, like our world, right? It is the geography separates the cultural mythologies, right? The cultural mythologies are stories of the 0 point to present day. These are the birth and the origin of these cultures, so that Norse mythology exists in Scandinavia, and simultaneously across the world, the Mayan mythology has its origins, right? These are cultural stories about how they explain the sort of birth of their cultures. And I think, as I look at the whole world, that each of these gods had their own domains, right? The same way that countries have their own domains and their own leaders.
This suggests that if Kratos was very driven, he could walk from Athens to Midgard, but that travel would take over 1,000 hours, according to Google Maps, and considering that Kratos didn't know anything about Scandinavia, it's a little ludicrous to imagine he strayed far enough to accidentally come across Scandinavia and Midgard. And so the lore reveals that it was actually 3 wolves and a woman who were responsible for Kratos' arrival to Midgard. A God of War novelization, endearingly authored by Cory Barlog's father, explains Kratos' journey to Midgard as follows. His blades out to defend himself from a trio of yowling wolves twice his height, one black with verdant eyes, one white, and the third grey. The black beast seemed to be the alpha, assuming the most forward position. A beardless god of war clad in the clothes of his life in Greece, slashed his blades of chaos to keep the predators at bay. But his actions failed to discourage their assaults. The movement revealed a woman behind the beasts, clad in a long cloak and cowl obscuring much of her face. Her raised arm sent all 3 creatures airborne to attack. The wolves ultimately haul Kratos to Midgard, where we jump ahead to the game's events. At first, I believe these wolves couldn't possibly be Skull, Hati, and Fenrir. Skull and Hati are Fenrir's children. Fenrir is Loki's child, and Loki is a lad who has not been yet conceived. But then I recalled this video of Mimir talking about Skull and Hati. Evidently, this narrative reveals that Skull and Hati are not only alive, but also under Odin's power. Furthermore, Mimir alludes to their father, the Archwolf, Hruvnir, at the beginning of the narrative. But what's strange is that that name is simply yet another one of Fenrir's lesser known names. Just Google it. Anyway, this establishes absolutely that all 3 of these wolves are alive by the time Mimir is tethered to the tree on the top of the mountain, because that's when his alleged gaps in knowledge begin to manifest. And we know that Odin has held Mimir imprisoned for 109 winters since our first meeting. All this suggests that the wolves were alive before Kratos arrived to Midgard, and they may have brought him there, and that the 3 wolves carrying Kratos are Skull, Hati, and Fenrir. And here's the proof that will blow your mind. Look at this picture right here. These 2 wolves standing next to Atreus are meant to be Skull and Hati. And look at their color. Look at the color of their fur. One's white, and the other one's gray. Now look at this picture here. This is supposedly Fenrir from the God of War cinematic trailer. And look at the color of his fur. Black. And you know who was the alpha wolf in the narrative, in the lore that I just read? It was the Black Wolf. And it makes sense. Fenrir, the Black Wolf, is the alpha since he is their father. The white and gray wolf's father. It all makes sense. But then, if those wolves are Skull, Hatya, and Fenrir, the question really is, who is the woman? That woman, I believe, is none other than Faye herself. Let's take a step back for a second. Here are a few facts about Faye. The first was that she was not a fan of the Aesir. Mimir calls her a giantess who thwarted many an Aesir god's plan, and the dwarves call her the Faye the Just. Second, she handed her axe, one of the few weapons capable of countering Mjolnir's strength, to her husband, who is a renowned god killer. Finally, we know that Faye and Tyr have worked together in the past. When you look at this mural of Tyr, you can see that the woman by his side is the same woman who appears in the game's final mural, Faye. And why is that significant? Well, in Norse mythology, Tyr is the only deity other than Loki who communicates with Fenrir before he is chained. Several passages in the Old Norse literature claim this. Tyr is the only other god willing to approach the wolf giants. When Fenrir eventually gets so huge that he worries Odin and the rest of the Aesir so much that they commission Brock and Sindri to create a fetter to restrain the Arch Wolf, Tyr was the only one brave enough to face the wolf. However, if we suppose that the three wolves that carry Kratos to Midgard are Skull, Hatya, and Fenrir, then Fenrir could not have been chained 100 years ago, which could explain why Tyr isn't missing his arms yet. But remember, the Faye is not a god, she is not a deity, and at the time she was cooperating with Tyr to prevent the gods from killing the giants, so I believe that she could have transported Fenrir and his offspring away from Asgard with Tyr's assistance in order to deliver Scandinavia, a hero capable of saving the 9 realms from the wrath of the gods, saving Midgard and humans from the evil of the Aesir. And what greater hero than someone who has just proven that they can defy the vengeful gods of Greece, and an immortal being who she does not despise but came to fall in love with. But this also begs the question, does this mean that Faye was never really in love with Kratos? That she only pretended to love Kratos to birth Atreus, who would play an important role in Ragnarok? I don't think so. I think that initially Faye brought Kratos to Scandinavia to come up with some plan to perhaps work together and kill the Aesir gods, but I think during that initial plan she fell in love with Kratos. And then her Jotun vision revealed that even though she did fall in love with Kratos, her plan would still go according, well, to plan. That she would eventually start Ragnarok and kill the gods nonetheless. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, if you agree with my theory, leave your comments down below. I'll check them out. I can't wait to read them all. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.